We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pick a Disc. I am at Latham and this is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. Today I have on the podcast Alannah from the band Problem Patterns, who's going to be talking about Sloan's Twice Removed. And you know, as always, I'll talking about the album, songs, blah 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 blah. But there's a lot of interesting things about how different culturally albums are received in different countries. Like this is something that's popped up on the podcast before. But it's something that was always interested me. So if you like that kind of stuff, you're going to be in for an interesting episode. Before I continue, don't forget to follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, whatever, under Pick a Disc. Search for Pick a Disc, it is probably me. And don't forget, we have a Discord server in the show notes. So, yeah, I am recording this the same time as I recorded the Eels episode, so my voice is still a bit croaky because of Christmas and just things just not liking me speaking for some reason. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let past me do the talking as we chat to Alannah. Okay, I was actually really looking forward to this because in my research for the album, I think before you picked the album, I was Googling the band and stuff. I'd found an article from about a year ago, well, at the time recording a year ago anyway, from thethinAir.net, where you talked about quite a few albums and stuff. And I know I own at least two. There's two that you've got that I really like. There's a couple of ones that I've not listened to, but they're on my list. So stuff like Guppy by Charlie Bliss, I absolutely love. The Tuts, Update Your Brain. I've seen them live a few times and they're really good live. And the Pretty Girls Make Grave album, I think the first song off that, Speakers Push the Air, is like the first. I've got a playlist of like some of the best, my favourite opening songs. Yes. And that's the song that I picked to open that playlist.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, I think it's one of the best openings for an album ever. So I was like, I was reading that. I'm like, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Alannah picks. So,
oh, I'm so glad you did, because that was the thing. Is like, I had done that list, and then when we were invited to do this, I was like, I don't want to pick something from that list because obviously that was like a top 10 all-time faves, and I was like, I don't want to repeat myself. So I was like racking my brains. What am I going to pick? And then when it got to this one, like Sloan were such a formative band for me, like as formative as like Weezer. In that article, like kind of people would joke about them being Canadian Weezer, but I think that doesn't give them enough credit because their discography as a whole is much better. You know, it wasn't just two good albums and the rest. But no, I'm really glad you actually read that because that's
yeah. So I was like, okay, I've got a gauge of what Alannah's music taste is. So I'm quite excited. So I'll jump there. I think I was kind of hoping that you'd pick something that I've not listened to before as well. So I was like, oh, it'd be quite interesting to see what you've picked and stuff. And yeah, so I know you just briefly mentioned them, but on the podcast formalities, I'll do the formalities. So Alannah, why don't you tell the listeners the disc that you've picked for us to talk about today?
Today I've picked Twice Removed by Canadian band Sloan.
And why have you picked Twice Removed?
It was a very important album to me growing up. I moved to Canada in the mid-90s, and it would have been a few years after this album came out, so it was still getting a lot of radio play, and they were, you know, kind of in the height of, well, not the height of the career, they're still doing very well, but they just became a very important band to me very quickly. And it is just, it's an iconic album. Like any Canadian will kind of tell you, like if they were to like, you know, on the spot list like the top 5 best Canadian albums ever, Twice Removed's in there, even though, you know, some people might have a different favorite Sloan album maybe, but they know kind of the important cultural turn that this took for Canadian music.
Ah, okay. So, I mean, do you remember when you first heard of Sloan or anything from this album at all?
It was actually, I had heard one of their other tracks because they're one of those bands that gets a lot of radio play over there, and it was actually their third album, which is probably the most commercially successful, One Chord to Another, which was the album after this, and they had a song called The Good in Everyone, and I just remember it very vividly because they're just performing in front of an airport, like there's planes flying overhead, And it's nothing like too grand or dramatic. Like they didn't pay for the planes, they just happened to film in front of an airport, and that was the plot. But it's like only like a few, like it's like a minute and a half long of a song, and I just remember that sticking with me. And then like all the other videos would kind of be played on rotation, and they continued to release stuff. They're still releasing now, so they've always been very present in Canadian music. They never really had a period where they went away for too long. Like even when they were like kind of on a hiatus, they were back within a few years with an EP or an album. So they've just always been very present.
Okay. So, and that song you're on about, so that was, what was the song you said you, what's the song that you said you,
It was called The Good in Everyone from
and that was from the next album. So what made you like go to Twice Removed and not that album?
It was, I found the cassette in a charity shop, like when I was a teenager. Like it would have been, you know, $1 or something. And I just, you know, got it on my cassette player when I got home and just rinsed the heck out of it. I still have it as well. Like I've moved multiple countries and I've brought that cassette with me wherever I've gone. And like, you know, I could easily get it on any other format, but I think it's just like there's something very nostalgic about having that little crackle.
Yeah, I think it's there's not been many people that have kind of like almost diverted this to pick a cassette rather than pick a disc. But yeah, so it's, I found that quite interesting as well that you went through that. So going back to that kind of article that was on about earlier, there's a definite kind of common, very similar overlapping style and stuff. And you mentioned Canadian Weezer, and I think you said you picked Pinkerton by Weezer, and Weezer is a band that I really kind of need to kind of listen to. I know that I probably would like them, but I think there's been a couple of times where potential guests that have not nearly picked a Weezer album, so I've not delved into them, and I can kind of see the crossover with this. But was she kind of into that music, that kind of indie popish before Sloan, or was it?
For sure. Like Weezer were the first band that I was passionately obsessed with. Like, you know, I had always grown up in a very musical household in terms of like my dad and my mom are both people that would get like a hyper fixation on an album, which is what I picked up from them too, you know, rather than just kind of casually listening to the radio. You picked the one album and that was all we heard in like the car or at home kind of thing. Like both my parents are like that, and that was something that definitely carried on to me as well. And yeah, I just Weezer were the first, and then when I was like kind of seeing the Sloan videos and stuff at the time, kind of, you know, it's another 4-piece power pop band of the same age group, same era. So I kind of attached very quickly to them as well. But again, just like, you know, I think like a lot of people have again compared them, and I would have when I was younger. But I think as a whole, their career is way more impressive in terms of output. And any Weezer fan will tell you that as well. Any Weezer fan is as self-deprecating as I am. Like, you know, you're really only passionate about kind of the first couple of albums and then a few later ones that are decent. But for the most part, everyone's kind of like, no, you know,
And
it's not great.
yeah, and I think from what my understanding of even some of the better albums, there are elements of those albums where they're like, where like you kind of just like,
yeah, it's more of a passing grade because they've it's unfortunate, like, and again I say this, you know, the only way, like Weezer fans all kind of have this mindset, but it's just like they've released such bad stuff that when they get decent again, it gives you this hope. And you're like, I know you're capable, and they just choose to, because they just love to think they're experimenting. And I would have no issue if a band was experimenting and being interesting, but the problem is that they experiment with pop music and they just become really boring. Like it's just this weird thing where, you know, I again, like bands should be able to kind of expand their horizons, but it's just really offensive when it expands into being a boring group.
So, but then when you compare it to Sloan, a Sloan quite different from that in that they've always been interesting. All the lows of Sloan are not as deep.
They're not as low.
No.
Like I feel like I have enjoyed every Sloan album to a degree. Like maybe I don't attach to them the same way that I would in case of like, you know, Twice Removed or One Chord to Another or Smeared or Pretty Together. But they've always still been interesting. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that they are four songwriters who switch instruments, which is also a big reason as to why I picked it, because Problem Patterns do that. And I talked to Alex from Fight Milk a few weeks back when we played with them in London, and he loves Sloan, and he was the first person outside of Canada that I knew that loved Sloan, without me introducing them. And so I had said about how I wanted to go on this podcast and talk about Sloan. And he was like, oh, yeah, because they're four songwriters who switch instruments like Problem Patterns. And I was like, there's the connection.
Yeah. Oh, annoyingly, I had that written down about a week ago because I noticed that.
Right.
Because I was like, I was going to bring that up, but because I did think that because I saw that and I'm like, okay. So I'm assuming was because I don't want to get too much into Problem Patterns because I want to get into Sloan. So we'll delve into Problem Patterns near the end as a whole. But the big question I was going to ask: do you think when Problem Patterns were set up? So I'm not sure about the genesis of who started the ball rolling with Problem Patterns, but was Sloan and that mindset a very key influence?
No, not at all. It was just pure coincidence, and it was only when Alex pointed it out that I realized there was a connection there. And I think that's what's made Sloan so good, is because they keep things interesting. And it's the same way that, it keeps things exciting for us, is that, you've got four songwriters, rather like there's not really an uneven ground there. They all come with very, strong suits to the table kind of thing. Like,
yeah, so there's no definite kind of front person.
No, they tried to have a kind of, this was one of their issues when they're kind of in their younger days, was they were on a major label, and the label was pushing a lot for Chris and Patrick, because primarily they would be the lead guitar and bass. Like the classic setup was Chris Murphy on bass and vocals, Patrick Pentland on guitar and vocals, Jay Ferguson on rhythm guitar and vocals, and then Andrew Scott on drum and vocals. And I think just, maybe Chris Murphy and Patrick Pentland have more of a way of writing kind of more radio friendly hits. Or at least that's what the label seemed to think, I guess. And I know that caused a bit of friction when they were younger, but I think it's kept things interesting for all of them. And I think as they've gotten older, they've kind of made more of a push to make sure that they're all equally represented on the albums. I know they had an album called Commonwealth, and I had actually just talked about this to Problem Patterns recently, because the whole concept of that album was everyone had even playing field. Because again, like in their younger days, they'd maybe get to the studio and they'd realize like maybe like 60% of it would be Chris songs or Patrick songs or something like that, and then the rest would be, not so evenly distributed. Whereas this album specifically, they all went in, and I think they might have had like 4 tracks each or something like that. And it was just like a nice even spread, and it's something they seem to be more conscious of. But yeah, I guess the label, when they were on a major, was pushing more for the 2 guys, and that was causing a lot of stress. Whereas when they went indie, they were able to make those decisions themselves.
Ah, okay. Yeah, then they're quite interesting. And then I think one of the big interesting things, and this is something that I've, particularly with kind of bands that I like as well. It's like bands with like multiple vocalists or even songwriters and stuff. And I can name quite a few examples off the top of my head, but I think the one that jumps into my head, and I think it is mainly because of the Canada thing, and it's an artist that's been covered on this group that's been covered on this podcast before, and again goes back to this concept or idea that I've always found fascinating, that there are kind of localized celebrities. So, I mean, I'd not even heard of Sloan until the email came through from Jamie saying that you wanted to speak about this. And I was reading into it, and I'm like, and saying, oh, this is like one of the biggest Canadian albums ever. And I was like, okay. And my only comparison to that is the Bare Naked Ladies, because I'm a massive fan of them. And then like you talk to anyone else I talk to, it's either 1 Week or the Big Bang Theory theme tune, and I goes, oh, what, they did other stuff as well. I went, yes, they did, because like yeah, yeah, look at Stephen Page. um, but like, but then it's that kind of like multiple songwriters that will kind of appeal to me. But and I think particularly since let's say it's been about 15 years now since Stephen Page left. When like Jim Duggan and Kevin Hearn have started doing their own kind of like started sharing. So it's not just because I think it was a case of like, oh, so Ed Robinson, Stephen Page leaves, Ed Robinson's going to be on that, but then I think it's kind of like 70% Ed Robinson songs and everyone else, but I think that's gradually evening out as it goes on, and it's always kept things interesting depending on what people's opinions of the Bare Naked Ladies are, because I know there's detractors, but there's also kind of fans, and I'm one of them. But I always find that quite interesting in a band, in that they're kind of willing to kind of share things, and it means things don't get monotonous or boring and stuff. And I think, I quite like that Sloan do that as well in terms of that. So for people who aren't aware, Sloan are a Canadian band that were based in Toronto, but originally from Halifax in Nova Scotia, which my geography of Canada's not that great. So whereabouts is Nova Scotia?
It's the very east, like it's east Canada.
So it's Vancouver.
No, the other side. Vancouver's
that's west. That's west. Yeah.
Yeah, Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's like the most east you can go.
Okay, so it's like the exact opposite of Vancouver. It's
yeah.
Okay. I thought so. Is it near Quebec? Is that near?
Kind of. Quebec's more centralized. Well, not central, but it's Quebec's inland, whereas Nova Scotia is on the other side of the Atlantic, basically.
Okay.
Where I am. But yeah, I mean, Halifax in the 90s especially, they really tried to push it as like the new Seattle, even though they weren't necessarily grunge bands from there, but it just had a really strong music scene. Like it's probably like, as a whole, Canada's most famous music scene that happened in terms of like popular music, because there were so many bands at the time that came out of there. Again, like you said, though, Canada fame is very different to regular fame, because you'll have kind of bands from the UK that, you know, break the US or go elsewhere and stuff. Canada is like, there's really only a few that kind of get out of there, and when they do, it's because they're on a mega level, like Avril Lavigne or Celine Dion or someone, Bryan Adams and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the rarity like Bare Naked Ladies, but then they're seen as a one-hit wonder when they've had such a like huge career and have been so celebrated for 30 plus years. And it's just one of those strange things, but there's just a whole kind of little oddballness about Canadian music in terms of like how massive you can be there. And a lot of that comes down to a channel called Much Music, which was like RMTV, but at the time it was very DIY, and there's a whole law called CanCon where a certain amount of radio and TV has to be Canadian content. So if you're a musician and you got Arts Council funding to make a video, you were going to get on Much Music. Like, you know, even if it was at like 1 a.m., you were going to get on there. You had to, like, they legally had to have that certain percentage of Canadian music, which is why, you know, some bands have managed to have that break, where else, you know, maybe in the UK they wouldn't have had that chance.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I'm pretty sure. I've got a sneak suspicion that I think it was on the podcast that previous guest Kiara, who's based in Toronto, hosted, because I remember listening to something that was talking about was it Much TV? Much Music. That rings a bell, and I remember listening to the fact that like it was either that podcast or a couple of others that were Canadian podcasts. I remember talking about it, and I think that quite an interesting concept in that like it generates homegrown content in terms of it, so it helps boost the local scene rather than just boosting international as well. So I find that quite an interesting thing. I don't think Britain or England has something like that. I mean, then again, I think perhaps in like the last decade and a half, perhaps like BBC Radio or Six Music, perhaps focuses more on kind of British side. But yeah, I can't think of anything from this side of the Atlantic anyway. There's something similar. So yeah, that's quite an interesting kind of thing. And and again, I think like even talking to previous guests, there are like parts in North America that like regional where but people are bigger in other places and other places as well. And I think like the US, for example, you'll have like scenes that are bigger in some places like country music as opposed to like Seattle where it's slightly more rock music. And when you mentioned about being the new Seattle, well, when they're trying to push Halifax as well, what I found quite interesting. Again, going back to that article about your previous the other albums that you said, there's particularly I think Bikini Kill or Kathleen Hanna, which I know that yourself and Problem Patterns have actually communicated with as well. Very Seattle based. So, and I think if I'm right, I think before they signed to Geffen, which is what this album's on, there was another label which was the same label as Nirvana. Was that?
Yes, I think. I'm not sure if Nirvana were on Geffen though. I feel like
I think I can't remember the name was. I think there was because their first album was on a separate label, and
that was it.
Yeah, and I think because it ties in with I think that kind of ties in with the story behind Pen Pals, which we'll get to a bit later on. But I think that like the Halifax and the Seattle kind of almost grunge scene stuff, I found that quite interesting. That yourself seem to be quite drawn to bands from both from both sides of that. And it's kind of that grunge stuff. So, did you find yourself getting more into kind of the grunge music or like the Seattle scene because of Sloan, or do you think that was independent?
I mean, I listened to a lot of different things when I was a teenager, and like I think I don't know, I did like a bit of like kind of the grunge acts. You know, like I did seem to focus on the age more on kind of like the independent Canadian stuff. Like once I got into Sloan, I kind of found all the other kind of Halifax bands really. And again, like no one was really grungy. It was kind of weird that they were kind of being, you know, pushed as the new Seattle, because I think it was just because it was such a strong community rather than it being a certain genre of music. Because the bands at the time, like you had like Plumtree, who were like these teenage girls doing like, you know, kind of jangly indie pop, and then like the Inbreds, who were just like a bass and drum, but not bass and drum, but like they were probably the most grungy. Like they were like like the most 90s sound you could possibly think of. Like just like a guy was doing like solos on his bass, but it wasn't it wasn't cringy. It wasn't like, you know, slapping bass and stuff. It was like playing it as if it was a guitar. And then you had like were they from Halifax? Thrush Hermit, who kind of had a little thing in the 90s in terms of they were on the Mallrats soundtrack, the Kevin Smith movie, which is my favorite soundtrack. I think I did talk about it actually in that article, but I think it was more of just like they were highlighted because of the kind of strength of the community rather than it being a particular sound. But like I did definitely, you know, as any angsty teen would be, get drawn towards that, even though I think the grunge movement was a bit before my time as well. But it was like would have been like my older sister and her friends listening to more of that stuff, whereas I was again more into the power pop. And kind of it is weird because I had this split of being really into stuff like Weezer and Sloan, and then being really into stuff like Bikini Kill. So you know, there's a little balance there of kind of being all over the place.
But yeah, and I think well, I can definitely see, I think, an influence of both of them, particularly in Problem Patterns as well. So you can kind of see like a band, so you have kind of like the kind of power pop elements, and then you've got the kind of Riot Girl kind of like anger in that as well. So I found that, so I found that as well. I mean, there's not that in the Twice Removed, but there's the power pop stuff about in that. So I think if we start talking about Twice Removed, I found the story behind it quite interesting in terms of basically their relationship with Geffen. So my understanding is that I think they were I've not listened to anything else they've done. I've only focused on this album, but apparently their debut album was Smeared, which apparently was slightly rough around the edges.
Yeah, I would actually it's weird because it was the early 90s and they were like, again, not doing like the grunge thing, but they weren't quite in their like full power pop element yet. There was kind of elements of like shoegaze on it, and like a bit kind of grungier sounds for sure, but not like grunge music. Like they were still, very like tight on the melodies and things like that, and have some harmonies on there and stuff. But there's like definitely kind of some shoegazy elements. Really, it was almost some of it's almost like Sonic Youthy, but more, but you could tell that these were a bunch of guys who loved, the Beatles. It was like they, I guess when they were in their really early days, they were in more of a punk scene. So you kind of had, I think that's what influenced kind of the heavier parts of the album. But then they were like really just wanting to write some like 60s pop music, and it just kind of mashed together. And then Twice Removed is kind of like all the best elements of that, but like more towards the power pop. Still quite weird. Like it's only really when they got to one chord to another that they went the full power pop way, in terms of like very tight hooks. Whereas Twice Removed is like there's some very kind of like weird moments on the album, which is why I think I like it so much, because you've still got like those hooks and like harmonies and things like that, but there's like kind of this oddball element about it too.
Yeah, and I think from what I gather from that I think Geffen signed them on the case of Smeared, but then I think this coming out was slightly. My understanding was this was because it's more pure power pop than perhaps grungy elements. Apparently, Geffen didn't like the didn't like the album, and from what I've read, that kind of didn't really push any promotion for it.
Yeah, it's I think they took the band that was getting all the buzz in Halifax, and they were going off of that because they would have been having these, massive shows with a lot of fanfare, and maybe heard kind of the grungier elements in Smeared and thought that they'd be heading more towards what all the bands at that time were doing. And then when they didn't, it was like, what have we put all this money into for? So we're not really going to support this. Like they should have, like, it's one of those things where in hindsight, people appreciate it more. It's kind of like with Weezer's Pinkerton at the time was this dark, like ugly follow-up to their very pop blue album debut. So it wasn't received well at all. And then in hindsight, everyone loves it. So Twice Removed is now again considered one of the best Canadian albums ever. And it's like on like, especially like I think it probably would have caught on a bit in like college radio in America. Mm-hmm. So there's probably like a little kind of cult group of fans there because they do tour America, but it's obviously much smaller venues than would be in Canada. So you'd probably have like a good collection of fans there, but they would have been the ones that were just like listening to it on their local college radio rather than on like the rock radio at the time. And I think, yeah, it's one of those ones that really just kind of caught more interest as time went on and people went back and listened to it because again, especially in 1994, like, it was really the tipping point, like Kurt Cobain died and people didn't really know what was coming next for rock music, and this came out and was just like weird and people were like, I don't know about this one. And then it was only when they went back that they were like, no, this is the most 90s album, like sounding album ever. Like it wasn't grunge, but it wasn't like the fully, radio friendly pop stuff, and it was just this lovely weird mix of stuff that it just sounds better with time, to be honest, to me.
Yeah, I think what 94, they probably never made I don't think they ever made it to the UK. But I think at the time though, I think 94, that's when there was the rise of Britpop, which
that's it too.
Which I think has some kind of element, like has some kind of like sonic like similarities with power pop from here, but feels different as well. So I think by the time that like Blur and Oasis and Pulp started coming up, right, there was just no room for any international. And it's kind of like going against the slightly dirtier aspects of grunge. So I think not even we. I think aside from Buddy Holly being on the Windows 95 disc, I think Weezer and that kind of cleaner power pop just wouldn't break through. And then you get to 96, Spice Girls come along, kills Britpop, and then pop music just dominates for like the UK for about 5 to 10 years. So I don't think so. Bands like Sloan probably just would not have got any headway at all.
That's it. I do wonder, if they were coming out at a time like now where you have so much more accessibility to kind of every kind of music and you get these weird bands coming from all over the place to tour the UK and Europe, if they would have done better in that sense. But like, I've never heard of them even coming over this way, which is, I actually found out recently Patrick was born in Northern Ireland and he,
Okay.
in the summer, visited here with his family, and I saw a selfie on Instagram where he was literally across the street from my work. I was he is on our playlist constantly. And I remember like it was really weird because a few weeks before that I saw like a doppelganger of his walk by and I was like, oh, that's a weird coincidence. And I had like said to my coworker who I'd introduced to Sloan, and he was really into them as well. That's why they're always playing on our playlist. And I said, that's so funny. Like, I know he's from here, but he's touring Canada, so that couldn't have been him. And then weeks later, he was literally across the road with a guy in a band here who I was also like, how do you know him? But like, I was like, they were literally like across the street and I could not believe it. But yeah, like they've never really, kind of gone off that whole connection of him being from here. Like they've never tried to kind of really connect with the Irish music scene, which is very surprising to me because there is a very strong Canadian Irish connection in terms of a lot of bands from here will go and play over there. And like, there's a lot of, strong Canadian Irish crossover. And so I've always been really surprised that they never acted on that because I feel like it could have done very well for them at the time.
Yeah, I think that's quite surprising because I think I've seen, because again, going back to Bare Naked Lady, I've seen them a few, like about 3 or 4, I think 3, maybe 4 times, and it's always busy. It's always in like the kind of the main rooms of the O2 venues sizes. So they're on the like the high triple figures, verging on the quarters and stuff. And it's always and for one hit wonders over here, I always find that quite interesting. Whereas and I'm quite surprised that there isn't enough of a cool fan base that made it to the UK apparently. So yeah, cause I couldn't find if they ever played here, but I don't know if they ever did. But yeah, so I think it's quite. I always find that quite interesting. Like kind of like we don't want. Oh, we're not going to push you for anything. I think it's given it fits in quite with like the idea that I'm getting with them of Sloan and not international underdogs, which I think from a US or international perspective is probably the right one. From a Canadian perspective, is probably like what they're massive. I'm trying to think of another. I can't think of any like a band that's like that. The only other one I can think of is perhaps Girls Aloud, where they just never broke
Oh
the
yeah,
UK. Yeah. But I don't think they ever tried, or at least the label didn't make them. I think there's international listeners, but they never made a push for that. But in terms of the songs on the album, so what songs jump out to you when you first think of this album?
One of my favorite songs, like I would say a top 5 favorite song, is Coax Me, which was a single, and that was another one where I think that like Much Music, again, being very important to my youth, they used to do these shows where I can't remember the name of the show, but they would just basically pick an artist to highlight for half an hour and like show all their interview clips that they had previously done with them and then play a bunch of music videos. And it would have been one about Sloan. And they used to like go down to the building all the time, being a Toronto band, and they would just hang out essentially. So they had quite a close relationship with Much Music, which I think helped their career quite a lot. They were also very funny guys, so they were always interesting to interview. And Chris Murphy had a really good impersonation of Nardwuar that they utilized quite often. Like,
Oh, okay.
So he was very good at that, and they loved to make that joke. So yeah, they did. It probably would have been one of those episodes that would have been on TV in the background or something, and they would have played a song I did know, one of their more kind of popular things, and then Coax Me came on, and the video was set up mimicking, that kind of famous Beatles look where it's the stage, but there's like 4 boxes and they're all evenly spaced in a line. And I don't know, there's something jumped out at the song about me and to me, sorry. And I don't know what it is because I didn't even fully understand its meaning until I was older, and I still probably don't know the full grasp of it, but like it just affected me right away. And I don't even know if it's just like musically or something to do with his vocals. I've always loved Chris Murphy's way of singing, like his falsetto. Whenever he hits those really high notes, it just like scratches something nice in the back of my brain. Um, like there was always a line that really jumped out at me, especially being kind of like in a lot of kind of culty fan bases such as Weezer's. But there's a line in that song that it's not the band I hate, it's their fans. That always thought like that always jumped up at me. And then there's a really Canadian line. I drink concentrated OJ. Can I think consolidated? It's okay. Yeah, then they say it's not the band I hate, it's the fans. 3 cans of water perverts me. 3 cans of water perverts me is such a Canadian thing to say because
Oh, okay.
basically in Canada, when you're getting your groceries and your juice and stuff, you have to kind of buy more in bulk over there because the weather is very fickle and you could be snowed in anytime. And canned OJ is a very Canadian thing to get. It's a frozen can of concentrated juice rather than, over here we would have squash and cordial. Over there you get a can of concentrated OJ and you have to, it's really annoying. It always really bugged me when I moved there because it's frozen solid and you're meant to leave it to thaw out and then you empty it into your jug, then you empty 3 cans, you fill the can 3 times with water to make your pitcher of juice. And I always hated it as a kid because the juice never melted when I wanted it. I'm very impatient. And, I just like the concept of squash is way better. But apparently, it was proper fresh juice. It was just very concentrated. But I just thought it was a very Canadian line to have the line about I drink concentrated OJ and then jumping to 3 cans of water perverts me because he's saying he's watered down. Basically, it's just a very Canadian line to put in there. Like it's a very
Wow.
niche thing. Like
Well,
the fact I have to
yeah.
explain it.
I wasn't expecting to have an insight into Canadian culture, but no, okay, but no, from based on Genius on this song, they seem to think this is about Kurt Cobain.
Right. Yes. That was,
Oh,
I forgot about that. See, I really should have done some research before this. Like I would have like read up a bunch of things years ago. But I think the line about it's not the band I hate, it's the fans. Yeah, it makes sense in the context of Nirvana for sure. And I think they probably, as a 90s band, felt a lot of pressure to be the next Nirvana, and especially being in the next Seattle. As Halifax was, claimed to be, even though again musically not related at all. But I think they probably had that pressure because they were probably seen as the Nirvana of Halifax, and they didn't get that kind of support and push that Nirvana did, being the biggest band in the world at the time. So
yeah. I wonder whether this, and I think there's definitely at least another song on here which is kind of seems to be, if not pushback, but more of a kind of reaction to Nirvana and Cobain as well. But yeah, I think when I was reading through the lyrics of this, I think earlier today, I was like, I don't know whether it's a tribute or slightly not like poking, not fun, but it's not a tribute. I don't know how to describe it because there seems to be quite there's a reference, like, so it's, if you take the Nirvana thing away from it and think just about it, like it's about say a public figure that's passed away, but then seems critical of the grieving of the significant other.
Oh yeah.
Of that, and I'll let people put 2 and 2 together of who I might be referring to, but I find that quite interesting. I don't know whether that's a reflection of the time, because I know there was a lot of initial kind of pushback towards Courtney Love at the time. I don't know whether that's deliberate or not, but I mean, did you ever think it might have been about that all, or I mean, what did you...
I do remember reading about that ages ago, and to be fair, in the context that it is, and about the grieving widow and everything, and yeah, it fully makes sense. Like they talk about her, money and stuff as well, and there was obviously a lot of criticism around the time when all that was happening, and even still to this day, to be fair. she's still seen as kind of like very problematic.
Yeah.
And there's always been like the legal fights between her and the rest of Nirvana as well, in terms of like the output of what they can do with what he left behind.
Yeah.
Um,
There's I think what I think it's got to be at least 3.5, nearly 4 years ago now on the podcast, but and it's one of the more favourite albums that we covered on the podcast. We did In Utero, and I only just thought about this, but I'm wondering whether the "coax me" line, I wonder whether that's a reference to the song "Rape Me" in terms of, because that's more about
right.
that, because the song "Rape Me" is about, it's not about sexual assault, it's
Yeah.
about the music industry.
Yeah, taking advantage. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder whether "coax me" is a reference to that in terms of personal grief rather than
Yeah. Because I feel like you might be onto something there. It's not something I've ever thought about. Because again, like the three cans line is about clearly like he's, watered down and kind of exhausted by it all. And the whole coax me cajole thing is about being convinced. So I could definitely see a connection between the two there. That's like, whoa.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
gonna think about that now.
Is that meme of that woman who's with all those like
Yeah.
stuff,
That's
like,
literally
like
me right now.
next time you hear it, I'm like, oh, it's either going to be like, oh, that's interesting, or oh no, he's ruined that song, and I apologize.
No. I'm fully like, I completely just, because again, I've just seen it. Like it's one of those songs I've listened to thousands of times in my life, and I do remember reading the thing about Nirvana years ago, and then it just went right back to just kind of enjoying the song on a, singular level without that context. And then now that you've connected it to that, I'm like, that makes sense.
Okay. So where do you want to move on to next? What other song?
Bells On is the song right after that one, and it's another favorite. I've been listening to it a lot recently, and I've thought like it's another Chris Murphy song. And to be fair, like as much as I love all of them as songwriters, I think his songs are my highlights on the album. It's very powerful, like it's a very somber song. And it's one of those things. I was listening to it earlier. Like, I mean, again, I've listened to it a lot recently, but it's like, I feel like if a band like Weezer or another band sang a song with the line, like, if I had a funeral, would you even care? It's like, oh, that's so cringy. But I believe it when Chris Murphy says it. I believe like the angst is very real. Like, I feel like any other guy in his 20s who sang that, I would be like, shut up. Like it just sounds like any other vocalist, it would come across as like really, really cringe and really whiny, and for whatever reason he gets away with it. Like I fully believe that he'd be really upset if this woman didn't show up to his funeral.
To be fair, I think as someone who used to be a guy in his early 20s, I'm pretty sure I had those feelings like, oh, if I had a funeral, would you turn up and stuff? So it's it's a very strange lyric to relate to, but particularly well, then again, that was more of a case that perhaps when I was much younger and I had like a bit more self-esteem issues and I don't think I wasn't depressed, but like just had like very low self-esteem, and that kind of like intrusive thoughts of darkness stuff. It's stuff that people have. I know other people have had it and stuff. So there's a relatability to it, to relatability to that lyric as well. And even though he's kind of over the top in terms of like, you can imagine it being sung by like someone like quite sincere. Sincere, like really having that kind of dark, intrusive thoughts, but also 13-year-old annoying teenager going, "If I had a funeral, like, would you even care?" And then storming off to his bedroom, and his parents just rolling their eyes and stuff. But
now he managed like the wrap around, like the lyrics that wrap around it, and the like, the whole, he does kind of mention the funeral a few times. Like he says like, alternatively, if you had a funeral, I'd be there with bells on, and then it goes into the big break of the song. Like he's just kind of, it's a very bitter song, but it's also bittersweet. I don't know, there's just something really powerful about it, even the way it builds up to him just going la 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 la. There's just it's very powerful to me.
it's
even though
lopsided affection. I think
Yes.
is a term that um, I can't remember where it came. I don't know where I've got that term from. I might start it from somewhere, but lopsided affection. The idea being that like perhaps someone likes someone more than they like in return and stuff. And I think this song is kind of like about that, but played for kind of melodramatic effect.
Yes, very melodramatic. It's probably one of the more melodramatic Sloan songs that have ever existed.
Yeah. Then again, though, I mean, again, my knowledge of Weezer isn't that strong. But apart from like the odd podcast that I've heard or bits and pieces that I've heard, I still need to. My New Year, I'm not going to New Year's resolution. I'm going to just get into Weezer, and finally listen to them. This sounded a lot of like what I'm assuming Weezer is.
This song would fit like completely at home on Pinkerton, which was their second album, and that's the really like dark one that I wrote about. And again, comparatively, especially to their popular debut, but this song especially because it's just like you said, melodramatic and like just kind of it's just like a little whiny, but like again believable. Like you actually have empathy for him. Like you believe, like it's relatable too. Like again, like it's that kind of unrequited thing of you know, there's like I believe what I can tell from the lyrics, like she must be in New York because he's like saying like your heart is in your art and mine's in New York, and he's like I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve, you're sleeping with a mutual friend. Like he's just like pining for this woman that doesn't see him the same way. Yeah, I mean, that's relatable to anybody really. Like everyone's kind of been in that position. And like, especially on this album, I feel like I think this is probably the most vulnerable song, which is why it kind of borderlines on the cringy. But, and again, that's mostly down to the kind of, the funeral line. But even then, like I say, it's relatable and more believable than, if another band tried to perform it.
Sleeping with a mutual friend, but the line, so in the first bit, the line that jumped out to me is I've been dividing my grieving.
Yeah.
Which I really like that line. There's a lot you can read into that.
Yeah.
In terms
I
of
love that line.
Is it grieving? I mean, a lot of it seems to be on surface level. It's very kind of like physical.
Yeah.
It's on about kind of like the physical side of it rather than perhaps, and only slowly starts getting into the emotional stuff. But then there's the mutual friend aspect of it and friend aspect of it. So he doesn't seem to be explicit about which grieving's been divided, but you can see into relationship, friendship with the mutual friend, friendship of the partner that he's talking about.
Exactly.
I really like that line.
Yeah, no, I love that line. And like if you kind of look at it in the unrequited or perhaps post-breakup way, that he's upset because clearly she's not as emotionally invested as he was, and perhaps they've already split up, but like, you know, she's in New York having fun with someone else and he's like miserable basically, and that's why he's saying the whole thing about like, oh, if I had a funeral, would you even care? Whereas he would absolutely be at hers. And I do find there's the lyric of would you actually wear lipstick, which I also am like but like, you know, would you wear your silver dress, would you actually wear lipstick?
It's like, then I think the surface level of like, again, I don't know whether this is me, whether it's just me just thinking this online, or whether it's a thing like how much you dress up for a funeral represents how much you cared for the person. It's like, are you just going to turn up in the background in like jeans and trainers
exactly
and just stand
like
from the back? Or
he's got this, you know, dream vision of her showing up looking incredible to like throw herself down at his grave, like lie upon my grave and be there with bells on so you can bring me from this life. Like he's literally got this like soap opera moment in his brain, but he's clearly not going to get that from her. Like this is clearly one-sided and non-reciprocated, and that's what makes the song work so well. Like it's very real.
Yeah, and there's always that kind of, as much as melodramatic, there's always that, whether it's who's it that sang it? Was it Chris Murphy?
Chris Murphy.
Yeah. There's always at least like a little smidgen of the way it's sung that it's kind of self-aware of
Yeah.
how kind of just over melodramatic it is. So it's not
Yeah.
completely sincere, but
Yeah.
then like
Yeah.
even though you think
He breaks into the, like, another band performing this, they wouldn't break into a whole la 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 la, like you wouldn't have that in there. Like, but he's just like in the middle of it, like the big break in that song from the first I'd be there with bells on, la la la. Like it's so satisfying.
so where do you want to move on to next?
My other favorite song is, again, it's another Chris Murphy one, but it's Deeper Than Beauty, which is Alex from Fight Milk, who I talked about before. This was the one where we instantly talked about this one because we were talking about each other's favorite Sloan albums, and I had said Twice Removed, even though I admit it's kind of like the obvious one. It is like, if you were saying favorite Sloan album, they're either going to say this or One Chord to Another. Whereas surprisingly, his was Never Hear the End of It, which was a later one, which I did like, but like I wouldn't be able to name anything past like the singles or something. But this was the song that we were immediately connecting with each other on, because it's really like, it's almost scrappy, like it almost feels like a demo. There's just something really disjointed about it, like there's no like real strong melody, but it's like this really kind of like, it really highlights kind of Chris Murphy's kind of cheekiness, where he's like singing to this girl, and there's a line where he's singing about her glasses. You can hear him laughing because he goes, "Your glasses, your hideous glasses." Like you can tell, like there's just something so sweet and genuine about this song, but also like he is kind of being a bit of a like bit rude. like he's, there's, I think the bit when Alex and I were chatting about this, we both sang the same line at the same time because we were talking about how good, again, his vocal is, where he hits into the kind of higher notes, because there's just this really lovely, almost euphoric bit at the end where he says, "When I dream of you, you're not wearing your glasses," but he hits this really lovely note when he says that, and it's just like something very like sweet, even though again he's kind of being very childish lyrically. You really can picture him just singing this to some girl, like, but like one-on-one on his like electric guitar or something, even though I'm not actually sure if, I mean I feel like he's playing guitar in this one, just because it's not as I don't want to say not strong, but it's much scrappier. Like it's just kind of like a rhythm guitar thing. Like Sloan are quite good with like, they have nice big beefy riffs on some of their albums. Like they're very good at writing those melodies, and this one is just like, it just sounds like there's not even a guitar pedal on there. It just sounds like some guy just going like, just strumming while he's singing this goofy little song, and like the rest of the instruments are kind of quiet in the background. Like that's why it seems kind of demo-ish. Like the melody is so strange. Like again, it does just sound like he's just like sitting in his room singing this song for his girlfriend, and she's like, "What is this?" Like it's such a like almost goofy, but I just love it. There's like such a charm to it. It sounds unfinished almost.
Yeah, there's what I think with this, and I think, well, one of the things I got from the old album actually is that, so yeah, I kind of grew up like the American teen dramas, or like the TV shows I watched. So like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something like that kind of stuff. Like the late 90s, early noughties, when kind of there was like a music, like there was more focus on perhaps incorporating contemporary music rather than just instrument, like just like score stuff. So yeah, so and like the first Buffy soundtrack is like one of I love that soundtrack. This sounds like something that could be on that kind of era of like teen drama, like even to this point, like, or even in a teen movie at that time, like the late 90s, where you'll have like, if not the main character, then you'll probably have like either a side character, perhaps trying to do this to either woo the main like protagonist or something, and the protagonist is like,
they're unsure.
I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, have you ever seen Not Another Teen Movie?
Yes.
Yeah. So I can't remember the actor, but there's the ongoing joke about the best friend who's in love with the main character. Yeah, I got the impression that this is probably something similar to
That's
the.
it. Definitely, it's giving side character, like, again, like kind of bookish guy who's in love with the main girl. Yeah, no, I totally
Yeah,
see that.
but the main girl's in love with Freddie Prinze Jr. or Chris
Yeah,
Evans or
yeah,
something like that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But
Exactly.
but yeah, no, yeah, and I think it's that kind of like idea that you try to make kind of quirky off like quirky jokes and they don't know and they come off as cringy and
Yeah, they're
like
not landing.
embarrassing and I don't want to admit that I don't want to admit that perhaps I've done that in the past but yeah, and like where you think it's supposed to be kind of like quirky and charming but then they just come out as like, oh, okay. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
like the last bit's like the rest of us with their thumbs up in our asses. If you call, I will come. Which perhaps in the protagonist in the song narrator's head, he's probably like a in joke, but perhaps the person who's being sung to isn't in on that joke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But so where do you want to move on to next?
I really love I Hate My Generation, which I think could also be kind of a, now that you've said it, could be a reference to the whole kind of early 90s grunge thing, to be fair. But it's a Jay song, it's a Jay Ferguson song, and I just really love the end, to be honest. I love the I feel like it's again another thing I would have read about years ago when they were probably doing kind of a look back on this album. But they just sing Simon Said Play, and I think it was their friend just trying to get them to do the show or something like that. I could be wrong. But it's they chant it out, which I always love a band that spells things out. Like Pixies did it a few times. I just love, I don't know why, it's just something really satisfying about it, but they spell out Simon Said Play, and there's just something really satisfying about that. And I believe Chris Murphy does backing vocals on it, but otherwise it's Jay, maybe a back and forth thing, but he wrote it anyway. Yeah, I just really love that song. I get it. I feel like, again, I should have done a bit more homework, but I've just been enjoying the album listening to it instead.
Yeah, what I got from this is that there are people that constantly moan about social media and the internet, and I'm pretty sure I've brought this up as well. And there are valid criticisms, but there's also a lot of benefits and in terms of how it's worked and stuff. And but like people saying, "Oh no, it's the death of society," blah blah blah. Cut to this album 30 years before, and it's talking about I hate my generation. They're all watching TV. Then it's the death of blah blah. Basically, every kind of technological thing is going to get people moaning about it, and there's like kind of that kind of same thing happening here in terms of that. Goes like, oh, I don't like it. Oh, I don't like what the modern world is awful because like of MTV and like rock music and rap music and Generation X and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, it's one of those things that'll always happen, isn't it? Like there's always going to be the older generation who are looking down on the younger ones, and then there'll be people within that generation who are like, ugh, I wish we could go, like I wish I was born in the 60s, because that was it. Like I think he said if I was born in the like 50s, I'd be a teen in the 60s or something like that. There's you know, and it's the same, like I hear kids now saying they wish they were born in the early 2000s, and I'm just like, how old are you? And then I remember that it's 2023.
Yeah, I was like,
I wish I was born in the early 2000s so I could been there for like the Warped Tour era and all those emo bands, and I'm like oh god.
no, you do not want to go to the Warped Tour when you were born in the early noughties.
Oh, oh my god, I was there. No.
But but then again, yeah, then again, I was. But then again, I think it's interesting. I think particularly when you got like the new generation. This is a weird tangent, but like the people say, I wish I was born in the early noughties. But then, so I was born 85. So and there's early millennial. But then there's like a weird thing with early millennial, late millennial. But then like late millennial, like in the mid to late 90s, they were born in a weird time where it was just like the boom of the industry, whereas like 80s, early 90s, where we kind of see this kind of weird mix of a world before the internet and the
Yes.
world after.
That's it. We were literally like, because I'm 86, and we were
Okay.
literally there, the beginnings when it was dial up, and you didn't even know, like, streaming wasn't a thing at all. You got kicked off if someone wanted the phone, and you were forced to go outside. You were told like you only had a certain amount of internet time because it cost so much.
Yeah,
Uh,
the first TV that we ever had, we had to go up and push these little metal
yeah,
buttons to switch the things. And again, I don't. It was me that broke like 1 to 4 because we had 4 channels back then.
yes.
I remember breaking, I think, BBC Two, the number 2. So whenever they had my mum and dad wanted to watch BBC Two, they had to press number 6. So my dad had to tune in
Oh
BBC
my
Two
God.
and number 6 and stuff. And it's but yeah, but I look back on that and I'm like, I can't. I look back and I'm like, I can't. I don't. I'm not one of these people that wants to go back to that. I love the remote control.
Yeah.
But I think that's a weird thing because I wonder whether that's a generation thing where there's like an odd gap. So like say, yeah, the year after me was born, like where people are like, I think we slightly have it better now in terms of technology, even though, and like maybe like, oh, well, we should go back to the noughties and stuff. You're like, no, you don't want to.
No.
No, just me. There's no there's no Snapchat, there's no TikTok. Yeah,
Yeah.
3.
I do
Yeah,
feel like there's kind of like, you know, uh like pros and cons, because I do think, oh, it would have been great to have like a calculator in my pocket at all times. But
yes,
that's the whole thing with maths, isn't it? They're like, you're not going to have this calculator wherever you go. It's like, yes, I will. Um, Whereas I'm also grateful to not be in school at a time when everyone's got video cameras at all. Gosh, the relentless bullying. It was bad enough without all the technology.
I think but on the terms onto that as well. I think particularly, I think if social media was as active as it was now when I was a teenager, because I mean, I was a couple of miles away from where my friends lived, and back then it's like a world away. But then but all my friends were quite close together, so we were able to kind of, I'd be at school and they'd be talking about playing football outside the night before, but I couldn't get to it because I was like what I knew now is a 15-minute drive away, but I couldn't get to it, so it was like a world away and stuff. So, but then if that was there, I'd be seeing all my friends at school playing football that I couldn't get to, and that would be quite isolating and stuff. And I'm kind of glad that wasn't there at that time. So it's a really weird mix of generation stuff. So, yeah, as I'm conscious of the time, what I'll do, I just want to briefly mention one song before we move on, and that's the album, The Pen Pals.
Oh yeah.
Because again, that's going back to Nirvana and but specifically about Nirvana, because the story behind this, if what I read's correct, is that apparently I think DCG, which I'm not exactly sure what that's for, was the label that we were on alongside Nirvana, and apparently they actually got in possession of fan mail that was meant for Nirvana.
Fan mail, yes, and it's literally just directly lifted, and that's what I love about it, because they didn't change anything. So you've got some lyrics in there that are actually kind of like broken English, which I find are really charming. And then like, I don't know what it is about like Chris Murphy singing I'm a girl, la la la. That's really satisfying. Yeah, it's just like, it's such an interesting choice of an opener as well. Like, if you had never heard Sloan before, as you apparently didn't, and you're like going into this album, and it's like the first album is literally just letters to Nirvana from all around the world, and that's it. Like, there's no other, they never wrote a tie-in chorus. It's just different fan mail, and there's just something so 90s about that. Like, and it's also really cheeky, and it is kind of, like a pointed thing at the old label, because it is just like, oh, you want us to be the new Nirvana or whatever? Well, look at this stuff we found in your office. We're just going to write a song directly lifting quotes from the letters, rather than, it being about it necessarily. And I think it's just such a fun little song. There's just something so cute and charming about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of moments which kind of delve into kind of YouTube/Instagram comments.
Yes.
Where like, can I have a wick of your hair?
Yeah.
Which
and
is,
a photo of you alone. Yes, yeah, which is like, Like if you didn't have the context for Nirvana and you're like, are these kids writing to each other? Like, is this a kid? I don't know. It sounds really suspicious. But then you have the
Yeah.
context of it all being fan mail, and it's like, kind of like there's that kind of parasocial relationship captured in the song, like, you know, a 90s song based off of fan mail to Nirvana that you'd still find, like you say, like it'd be very similar to YouTube comments of today.
Yeah, exactly. And there's that here's my photo. Is it decadent? Decadus? I'm not sure how that's pronounced. But one of you will be canon. I worship all your handsome words. To me, you seem giants. That's definitely broken English.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering what that actually meant.
Yeah, because there's
But,
is it the line after that it's like, I am crazy of you or something like that? Like there, it's like definitely again like
that's slightly earlier. So I'm a
yeah, yeah,
Norwegian boy, which have
yeah,
some question. I am only
yeah.
13 years and I'm crazy of you.
Yes, I love that.
It's a very, this is like a precursor. This is like the kind of almost slightly wholesome version of Stan by Eminem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like it. They clearly just kind of picked the ones that stood out to them. But yeah, it is kind of funny in that way. Again, like you said about like, you know, I want a photo of you alone. It's like, something really weird about that. It is quite funny though, like when you really kind of look at the album as a whole and that they decided to put this as the first track. Now that you've then mentioned kind of later tracks like Coax Me being related to Nirvana again, and it's just makes it so much more 90s than it already was. Like if there was any
Yeah.
else, like 1994, you know, really, really drives that point home.
Yeah, I did have a quick look at when this was recorded, the actual album. So the album was recorded January to March of '94, and I can't remember when. And it was released in August of '94.
Hey, gosh,
But I
that's a
can't
quick
remember
turnover.
I can't remember when Kurt Cobain died.
Kurt died in, let's say it was April. It was near his birthday, maybe.
It was
Not
circa the 5th of April. So,
right. So they
so
actually wrote Coax Me before he died. Interesting.
well, I'm going. Well, it was released on the August. It was released in August, and Wikipedia said it was recorded between January and March.
Hmm.
So, yeah. So, maybe that's wrong, or maybe Genius is wrong about Coax Me. But
I mean, I would have fully made the connection, especially with the grieving widow and everything. There's every chance they went in there before, like, you know, afterwards and threw that song in there.
okay,
Like,
that's
I mean,
interesting. Anyway,
that's just a theory, but yeah, I would have fully connected that because I do remember reading about that same thing a few years ago. So
unless that recording bit was that recording things wrong in Wikipedia. It serves me right for using Wikipedia for research. So in terms of the reception of the album, not much actually in terms of review scores on Wikipedia. So it's got 4 out of 5 on All Music and got B+ on the Village Voice. I couldn't find a Pitchfork review, which is really annoying because I always like to see what Pitchfork would have the score more or less because it's always quite an interesting thing. But yeah, but in terms of the commercial performance, he got to 25 on the Canadian Albums Chart by February 1997. The album had sold 58,000 units in Canada, and then the album was certified gold in Canada in 1998, which meant...
I think that would have been a push after, because basically Twice Removed came out, and again, it kind of faltered them a little bit, and especially because it was meant to be their big major label thing. And then when they did One Chord to Another, that was more commercially viable and successful within Canada anyway, you know, it's much poppier, much more accessible. And then Navy Blues came out in 98, and that was their big rock album. Like that's like those songs on that album are still the songs that they play at like the hockey games. You know, it's big music in Canada when it's at the hockey games. Like it's the stuff that pumps people up at the games. So I'm
Is that the...
assuming,
So is that the biggest part of the pie chart on setlist.fm? So you know on setlist.fm where it's because it'll give you a pie chart of what albums
oh right,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
set
yeah.
list. So is that the album that...
I I mean, I'll have to have a look, but I would assume as much because they're like the crowd favorites, not necessarily the fan favorites, but if they were playing a big venue, everyone would be going there to hear like she says what she means and stuff like that. Gosh, it's really, I'm gonna have to look this up because it's really bad that this has escaped my brain. Yeah, Money City Maniacs, of course, it's the number one on Spotify, not surprisingly. That I the lyrics are a bit nonsensical, but again, it was like the big hockey game song. It's just one of those ones where it's like a big like fist pump one, like it's when they got really into their like rock radio arena music kind of thing, like still again very power pop, but just beefier riffs, very very radio friendly. And I'm assuming because that was such a big hit for them that then people went back and looked at Twice Removed a bit more, which is probably why it finally like got to gold in 98. Because yeah, Navy Blues would have come out in 98, I believe. And that was their big moment in terms of mainstream. Like they carried on being mainstream in Canada for a bit after that, and they still very much be considered iconic in the music scene there. But that was like their really big moment when they were probably playing the biggest venues that they were gonna do. And again, it was hockey music. And like that's not insulting them at all. Like I love Navy Blues and there's some really great tracks on that as well, but it is very much more like beefy riffs and just catchy stuff rather than like the more vulnerable side of Sloan.
Okay. So have you ever seen them live?
Yes, and it was one of the best gigs of my life. It was free, which made it even better. It was in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto in 2005, and they were just playing like this. I think it was literally just called Winterfest, which is very predictable for Canada. It was snowing, very very cold. And I remember, like, even though this is 2005, I would have been 19, and I traveled up just to go see Sloan, and it was yeah, it was just brilliant. Like it was just this outdoor show. And I was like, I had gone with friends, but they wanted to kind of stand at the back. And I was like, I'm going to the front. And I was surrounded by like older fans. Like I was like all these like kind of like middle-aged women who were still screaming like Chris, who had been there since the beginning, clearly. And it was really funny because we kind of got chatting before they came on, and they were like, oh, like, because I was like the youngest one amongst all of them. And they were like, asking where I traveled from and like what's your favorite song. When I said Coax Me, they were like, yeah, like they like, I fully like won these 90s girlies over. And the best thing, and this is like kind of what we were saying before about us being kind of this middle bit of like, the push of technology, is YouTube had only like come out in 2005. And
yeah.
people were just uploading, whatever video they had, even if it wasn't great quality. And there's a video of them performing Coax Me. And there was this moment, because again, I was front and center with all these women. And when they were playing this, I started screaming. And again, like you could barely, like if you didn't know the context, you wouldn't get it because the video is so blurry. But it's the fact it exists and I know the context and I can go watch it. But they all started pointing at me, trying to get Chris's direction. And there's just a bit where he's playing and he just goes, yeah, like he's like smiles and like just, and like that was him looking at me. And it's the fact that the internet is so old now that I can go watch a video from 2005 and again it's blurry, but I know the exact moment that he's like, yeah, like because I was just like all these middle-aged women pointing at me being like, oh. So it was one of the best gigs ever. And again, like bonus points that I didn't have to pay to be there. I really wish I had seen, like, I wish I had seen them more, but I did move back to the UK in 2009, and unfortunately, to my knowledge anyway, they have not, at least since then, been over. In the very least, not in these last 14 years have they been to the UK. I could be wrong, but like I follow them, quite strongly. So I mean, I would hope I'm wrong because I'd be really sad if I missed them. And I would love, like, I was actually over in Canada 2 years ago, and they were meant to be coming through where I'm from very shortly after I was there, unknowingly. Like they were playing like I think there was a venue that was closing in Tillsonburg, Ontario, where my mom lives, and it's a very small town, but like they were going to play it just as like a special treat just because it was closing down, and it would have been wild to see them in like a little like 200 capacity bar versus outside at like a few thousand people. Or like I wouldn't say they're still doing arenas or anything. I'm not even sure if they were really an arena band outside of kind of like the more outdoor amphitheater festival kind of things. But still compared to seeing them in one of the bigger halls, it would have been really cool to see them in like my local. But unfortunately, it didn't match up. But I would have loved to been able to do that. And yeah, they're still like yeah, it's one of my top 10 favorite gigs I was ever at, even if I was alone, basically. Like my friends were at the back and I was just having the time of my life up the front with these strangers who were just like looking after me. Like, they just could tell I was like I was amongst friends, even though I didn't know any of them. Like they were just so overjoyed for me when like Coax Me kicked in and they were like, "Ah, look at her." And I was just like, ah. Like it was so great. Like they're just such fantastic performers, and I love even just watching like the live videos that they post on their socials now. Like they're still so just like they just still look like they're all having a lot of fun, which is the most important bit. Like they're like they formed in like 91 or something like that. They were probably playing together before that, but it's like, that's a band of the same four guys. Like they've never had a lineup change. And there's a lot to be said for that. Like, even if they've taken little hiatuses here and there, it's always been the same four guys for 30 plus years. That's wild.
Yeah, same four guys who have got like felt like it's a very even, like almost communist way of songwriting. Yeah. But no, yeah, I think I'm glad you got that, and I'm quite glad that you've got the that memory that you can tap into in terms of that.
That's the funniest thing, because even though it's like a blurry, like it wouldn't have even been a phone camera at the time, it would have been someone's like digital camera, which has happened a few times. There's actually a few gigs on YouTube where like I've been at them and like I have the memory and then I find it, and again it's like blurry, but I remember what happened. So it's like a weird kind of like blurry flashback.
Quite a few years ago I found wasn't my I have like the kind of three first gigs. So like one I went to when I was like a teenager, which was Steps, that was my sister's birthday. Then I went to see the Killers in 2004. Then the one that kind of lit the blue lit paper and made me go to loads of gigs was in 2009 when I drove to Manchester to watch Los Campesinos. And and I've just found like randomly just like Googling about that date and stuff, and I found a bunch of these videos, and it was the person that was in front of me.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, filming this, and this was 2009, so it was a camera, but it was slightly a bit more higher quality. And I was just thinking, oh yeah, and I think there's one song, and I could hear me screaming, and I'm like, no, I've got to stop.
Oh, that's amazing. I love, like I've found earlier this year, it was actually only uploaded a year or two ago, but it was this band that was like they were from Ottawa, but they would come down to our area quite a bit and play like the smaller towns. And it's from 2006, and me and my best friends are in the front row, and you can see us very clearly because it was on someone's like proper handy cam rather than a little digital camera that would have been like 2 megapixels. It's on their proper like VHS camcorder, so it's actually really good quality and sound. And there's like multiple clips of some of my oldest and best friends just in clear view, and we're just at this bar in Woodstock, Ontario, watching this band. And it's amazing what's kind of popping up now. Like that is another kind of benefit of like YouTube and technology, is people like ripping these videos that otherwise would have just been on their shelf. Being able to give us those kind of memories again, like finding ourselves in these videos that we would have never filmed because we didn't have cameras on us all the time. It's quite amazing in that respect.
I'm not going to. I'm again conscious of the time, so I'm not going to go down. There's a whole interesting conversation about like the cameras at gigs and stuff, and the like whether there's benefits and all that stuff. But I'm pro it, but because of things like this.
Yeah.
And I'll refrain from jumping onto a soapbox because a soapbox about that seems. But okay, I know you talked about the next album, but if people have listened to Twice Removed and want to listen to more Sloan, where do you recommend they go next?
I would fully say one chord to another, just because again it was that kind of like they broke up at that point, basically. Like it wasn't even that they were like thinking about it, they had broken up, and then this album shocked them in terms of it being, you know, commercially successful. So they were like, let's have another go, and then they've, you know, never stopped. They continued to do it. And again, that was like the album I would have heard them for the first time because it was getting a lot of play when I kind of first moved to Canada. And there's it's like the peak of their very 90s still, but power pop sensibilities, because they never really left the power pop behind. It just got, you know, more modern. And like they're still very much clearly influenced by like 60s bands and things like that. But like as they kind of, you know, got older, they, you know, went into again a bit of the arena rock with Navy Blues, and then like you know, in 2001 they had a big hit with If It Feels Good, Do It. That was a big radio hit, and that was another one that was quite big and beefy and riffy. And then they kind of softened after that a little bit, went back into the kind of again 60s inspired power pop stuff. But I would say one chord to another would definitely be like my second favorite. I do have a lot of love in my heart for Smeared, even though it's like the more kind of like, it's probably the least Sloan album, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do really love it. You can tell it's just some guys in their early 20s, like just having fun and having a nice time in Halifax, Nova Scotia before everyone moved to Toronto. Or I think there's like, you know, there's a song on there called I Am the Cancer, and it's about Chris Murphy moving to Toronto and like, you know, saying goodbye to all his friends, basically. And he's just, it's almost not almost, it's definitely self-deprecating, because the lyric is, I am the cancer removed from you. And he's saying like, so long, everybody, I'm going to Toronto. Like, you're probably all mad at me, but I'm going. You know, but and it's very like, there's a few songs on there that are like a bit of a surprise for sure. Still very Sloan, but almost like the least Sloan. I don't know. It's hard to explain. And then Pretty Together had their really big radio hits. There was a song called The Other Man as well, which for a bit of Canadian insight and goss, this is the big gossy one, was that song was written, The Other Man was written, Chris Murphy's perspective, that he had an affair with Leslie Feist, who was married to Kevin from Broken Social Scene. And he wrote about being the other man, and it became this big radio hit. And it was like, oh, that's awkward. Because like Leslie Feist and Broken Social Scene were like Canada's, you know, indie darlings. They're like king and queen couple. And then Chris Murphy wrote this big radio hit about her cheating on Kevin with him. So it's like, oh, like that was like really, really steamy gossip at the time.
So that's the I don't know. I can't think of a British comparison, but that's yeah, I think that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting that of that. But yeah, so if people want to go on, so people who are interested in carrying on, just basically go to the album. So okay, so we're getting to the end of our conversation, Alannah. So we're here for the very, very big, the most important question, which is the song for the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. Now, for anyone who's not listened to this before, what this is, I'm going to ask Alannah to pick one song to be immortalised forever. So whatever you say goes. I can't veto it. So whatever song you want to pick, go for it. So, Alannah, which song do you want to put onto the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist?
It will absolutely, without a doubt, be Coax Me. Like, it was the single from the album, but it's also what kind of captures the album the best for me. It's again a top 5 all-time song of any band for me. So Coax Me for sure, regardless of its real meaning and when it was recorded.
Okay, so so Coax Me joins I Like Birds by Eels and a song that hasn't been recorded, and a song that hasn't been picked yet because the episode has been recorded, because that will be the fifth birthday celebration that's been recorded next week.
Well, congrats.
So we get, so basically this will follow Eels. So we are now at the end of our conversation, Alannah. So I want to say thank you ever so much for introducing me to Sloan.
Thank you for listening, and thanks for having me.
I think as well, I wouldn't mind probably listening. If anything, it's probably given me a swift kick to, not to to perhaps dive into Weezer finally, and not just
I
wait for someone
really
to
only
pick
have to go into those first 2 albums.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. So if people want to find you, Problem Patterns, where can they find you?
We are on all the major socials like Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. I believe all of them as Prob Patterns. TikTok might be Problem Patterns, but then more importantly, we're on Bandcamp as problempatterns.bandcamp.com, where you can find all the music.
So, and I think a couple of months ago, at the end of October, you released, I think, your
Our
debut album.
yes.
Blues Club.
Yeah, we released our debut album October 27th via Alcopop. Been the 5 years work towards it, and we're really all very proud of it.
Yeah, I've said many times on this podcast, I love Alcopop.
I forgot to mention one bit actually that we stole from Sloan directly. This was one thing that we took from them, but only very recently. We did a zine with the album, and in the insert of Twice Removed, because they swap about, they wrote kind of a graph of who plays what on each song, and we stole that for our zine alongside Blouse Club.
Oh, cool. But say Alcopop Records, I think I've said many times I bloody love them. So it's great to go on. And I have listened to Blouse Club as well. So that's a very angry stuff. Very much, it's very good to listen to first thing in the morning when you're driving to work. It's very much one to wake you up and get you revved up for the day. Exactly, yeah. But yeah, I can I know we haven't talked about it that much, but I can. But kind of the side of you that likes kind of like basically Kathleen Hanna and the Right Girl movement stuff. It's full on that stuff, and it's like pretty much. Yeah, I was listening to it going, yep, this is definitely going to too. So yeah, anyone who's into that, please go and give it. Just give it a listen to anyway. So it's a great album. But yeah, and we are now at the very end of the conversation, and I just want to say again, thank you ever so much for coming on, Alannah.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been fantastic to chat about Sloan. I'm really grateful to have done so.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Do you like crime stories, books, and people talking about those things? Then you should check out the Read and Buried podcast.
A murder? Oh!
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Sarah.
And in each episode, we pick a different theme and surprise and delight each other with a cheeky little review.
As you started reading, I was like, this sounds like a romance novel. And then you got to monstrous crime.
Yay, there it is. That's what we're here for, isn't it?
We're also regularly visited by many talented and best-selling authors, including the likes of Chris Whitaker, Elizabeth Haynes, Emma Stonex, Fiona Cummins, and a whole lot more.
I obviously listened to the podcast, and I listened to you interviewing Chris Whitaker, and I thought, oh, hey, that sounds like a really good fun podcast.
If you like your crime books with a big side of silly, this is the podcast for you. Listen to the Read and Buried podcast right now, brought to you by the We Made This network.